Namaste, yogis. Welcome to Bhakti Yoga Conference. This is it. We're hosted here at Harvard Divinity School. I'm Happy Jack, the founder of Happy Jack Yoga University, and a student, a Master Divinity student at Harvard Divinity School. And really, the theme of our conference is grace in an age of distraction. And this is our opportunity to bring in different thought leaders and monks and scholars and yogis and musicians and truly beautiful souls from all around the world, different prominent voices to share their life, to share their heart with us. And really the intention is to give us inspiration, ideas for incorporating bhakti yoga into our lives. As of now, over 1,900 yogis have registered. Of course, a smaller subset of us gather here live in Zoom. But thank you for those who come live. Huge thanks to those also who catch the recording. If you have questions, certainly at the end of the session today, we'll open up for a Q&A. So save those, get our attention, raise your virtual hand later in the session. We've got a very special guest today. Truly honored. I'm going to spotlight her as I set up as I read out a bio. This is Dhanya Rico. Dhanya holds a master's degree in counselor education and a specialist degree in couples and family therapy. She aims to help individuals and relationships thrive with deep spiritual principles at the core of the therapeutic experience. In addition to traditional modalities, Dhanya is passionate about developing therapeutic tools that incorporate bhakti principles and practices as a means of reconnecting with our essential nature. Dhanya, just on a personal note, you're such an important person in my life. I look to you as one of my Shiksha gurus. I've explained on a previous call, that's really somebody that we look to for spiritual guidance. I feel so blessed. Twice a month, we meet in a Zoom call just like this, and you serve as a therapist for me. I feel like as a coach, as a spiritual teacher, and actually our community, they hear about you all the time. Because often we will have our sessions on a Monday, and then on the Tuesday, Hannah and I, we lead our weekly podcast. And I'm just like, yes, I just had therapy yesterday with Dhanya. I'm in such a good space, and I get to share, truly the impact that you have had on my life. So many of the students here and watching this have heard all about you. And I must say, I'm honored. I heard, we connected actually just yesterday. We had a session yesterday, and you mentioned that your mom, who's a longtime devotee, joined one of the sessions. The first session was Satchidananda Swami, and that's just really a testament to the quality of the speakers that have gathered here, and that includes you. Our session today is called The Opulence of the Feminine in Mature Spirituality. My friends, if you are ready to get started with Dhanya Rico, throw your arms in the air and loudly chant Haribol. Welcome, Dhanya.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
Beautiful. It truly is an honor. And so we have a session planned. And just before we get into that, what we found super helpful is if we get to know each of our different guest speakers. And would you share a little bit, like it was actually just a very small bio. That was just a few sentences that I found on a website. But could you give us a sense of like what brought you to Bhakti Yoga? How did you end up here? Probably a follow-up question will be like, how has it impacted your life? But just to begin with, how did you come to Bhakti Yoga?
Yeah, I appreciate so much the opportunity to be here. So I want to express my gratitude first and foremost, and to yourself, Jack. It's been such a pleasure to work with you privately and also to be a part of this beautiful conference. And I think that, in Spanish, we have this phrase, in Venezuela specifically, it's called poder de convocatoria. It's like your power of convocation. It's like the power that you have to bring people out and bring people together. And I know that that is true of you in your work as a yoga teacher and a space holder for your community. And now I see how that same gift is being shared here in this Bhakti community, and you're bringing speakers together and people of all different demographics and all different geographic locations. And, it's so beautiful to be able to share in this way. There's so much hesitation I feel around technology, but then things like this are such a gift, you know. I'm able to see even, you know, familiar faces. I see Hannah and I see Pip and I see, you know, all these beautiful people that we've gotten to share time and you know, do good work with. And I'm so honored to be here with all of you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share. So yeah, how did I end up here? Only by the grace of God, I think, you know, um, my upbringing, my father, he's an initiated disciple of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who is the founder of the Krishna consciousness movement. And he brought Krishna consciousness to the West in such a humble but clearly determined way. You know, he used his retirement from family life as a deep meditation in writing the Vedanta Sutra in a way that was accessible and digestible for people of this modern age. And once he finished only, you know, 3 volumes of the first canto, he basically was like, I'm headed on a ship, let's go to the West, which was an instruction from his spiritual master. It's such a bold move. And I think that that boldness is kind of a signature energy of Krishna consciousness in this modern age. Um, and so following suit, you know, he comes to the West and he starts preaching in the United States. And my father somehow contacted Krishna devotees in Israel. And through that, he was exposed to, interestingly, Prabhupada's voice. It's a super wild story that we probably don't have time to tell, but he wound up at a preaching center on Janmashtami, which is like Krishna's birthday, and he was like the only guest. So he got to like try all these, you know, this huge feast, and they did kirtan, you know, call and response chanting, and then he was exposed to Prabhupada's voice via headphones, and it really shifted something. I think the vibration like penetrated all layers deep. And it shifted his life forever. You know, he committed his life to following Prabhupada and his teachings. And then, you know, eventually he met my mom. You know, my dad, parallel to his spiritual journey, is like an extremely talented, prolific, well-known musician in South America. And so as his, you know, career was kind of starting to blossom, you know, he also met my mom. My mom was kind of having her own spiritual questions and journeying herself and kind of exploring her values and her beliefs. And they met, and she was able to, you know, learn so much about spirituality from what my dad shared. And then she did her own kind of seeking and journeying. And so, you know, those are the that's the environment that I was born into. I didn't grow up in a spiritual community. I grew up in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, and then eventually moved to Miami and then back to Caracas. So I was kind of between those two places, but I was never part of a spiritual community as such. I went to public schools and I went to like a Catholic private school for high school. I went to a, you know, university to study psychology, and then got my undergraduate degree in pre-law, thinking somehow I was going to be going to law school, but then I realized it would bring out aspects in my nature I didn't want to highlight, like the tendency to be defiant or argumentative, or um, so I thought, well, what's another way where I can really dig deep? I think my attraction was understanding truth in a way that was multifaceted, right? Even the principle, even the idea of being a lawyer and saying, okay, one situation could be seen as adversarial, but there's some element of truth to either side, or there are many ways of looking at one situation. I think that that's what attracted me to that path, and I think that's what attracts me to understanding human nature and spiritual nature, is getting at that root of what is true, and knowing that truth is a big, wide ocean, and that ultimately what is the substance and what is the source of that truth is grace, which is why I love, you know, the title of your conference. You know, it's grace in an age of
Distraction.
distraction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's so interesting because that's the context. It's not that grace isn't there, it's just that we're not paying attention. Right. And so I think that that's kind of what started bringing me back. You know, I was exposed to so many different kinds of faith, so many different kinds of atheism or agnosticism growing up. My parents never really forced the practices on me, although they were around and available and very present in each of their own lives in their own way. But I think that steadily, the curiosity was getting to me, and the need to explain spiritual phenomenon, to explain even material phenomenon, the need to understand the mechanics of relationships and the patterns of relationships, which seemed like more cosmic than idiosyncratic. Like I was noticing patterns and I was noticing, yeah, and I was like, what? And the more I realized, wow, this faith that's sort of been kind of in the background and on the periphery of my life, um, really has like this potent truth that I seem to be so attracted to, but I can't really get at it from the surface. And so, I have the nature to want to study things academically and like in an in-depth way. So I ended up going to um, Mayapur in West Bengal, which is one of the hubs of like study and spiritual practice for our culture. And yeah, and I studied the kind of foundational bhakti scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction, Sri Upanishad, and beyond just reading and trying to really understand the texts themselves, it was developing a relationship with Srila Prabhupada as the author and as the interpreter of these texts, and also establishing a relationship with Mayapur as a place of pilgrimage that is alive. Understanding we can have relationship in bhakti, we can have relationships with people, we can have relationships with divinity, we can have relationships with nature, we can have relationships with literature, we can have relationships with places, right? These portals that are places of pilgrimage. And I sometimes say when I talk about Mayapur, Mayapur is one of the few places on the planet where I love that place and I felt like the place loved me back. I felt such an opening and like a mother's embrace living there, even though it was, quite austere and difficult. I mean, you've been to India, it always comes with its challenges. But yeah, I feel like the place itself, the energy of the place itself, and the like extremely powerful advanced spiritual practitioners of that place embraced me with this spiritual energy, and that's what brought all of this, the literature study and the theory and the theology. It brought it all to life. Like it actually gave a context, and I realized that that was grace, the grace that exists from hundreds and thousands of years of intentional spiritual practice being performed in one place, and God and Goddess making themselves present even physically in that place. So, long story long, I guess, all of that, brings me to say, okay, well, how do I put this into practice in terms of how I want to serve? And I realized it did come back to relationships. So I ended up getting my master's degree in counselor education and coming at relationships less from a clinical psychology angle and more from an educational standpoint, which is what do we need to learn together? How do we teach each other how to be in right relationship with ourselves, with each other, with nature, with divinity, and then from there continue to serve and open up this grace that is really available, if we pay attention. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's what I strive to do. That's what the mission is, and yeah, that's what I'm here to share to the best of my capacity.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And maybe just one more question, because I want to leverage this expertise, this experience you have of working, as a therapist, working with individuals, with couples. I'm seeing, dear friends here. We got Ian and Heather on the line. We got Sarah and George. It's really nice when couples, come together and they come to this path and this spiritual path. Could you just share a little bit? What is the in a way promoting the work that you do, but like what is the importance of bringing a bhakti framework, a spiritual framework to relationship? What are maybe some of the results you've seen? How has it helped? Because I can assume maybe sometimes it's like really good where people are aligned with their interest, and maybe sometimes a little bit different. But I guess what has the impact been, and what is the importance of bringing a framework like bhakti to the work that you do, and just to relationships, because we're all in relationship.
Right. Yeah, it's such an important question. They say that there's three truths, like axiomatic truths that need to be properly situated in order for us to make progress in spiritual life that's not like haphazard, right? Sometimes you'll have a spiritual experience. You just like walk into a cathedral or walk into a mosque or some meditative place or experience like a Vipassana retreat, and then like something is awakened, but it's almost like accidental, or it feels a little haphazard, like I don't know how to organize this in my, what does this mean, like how does this align with my beliefs, is there something, how do I do this in practice? And so there's certain axiomatic truths that the bhakti literatures present as essential in order for us to make progress that feels intentional, that feels like is goal oriented. um, and one of those is the principle of sambandha. Bandha means like bind, like it even sounds like the word, right? Bound. Sambandha, and sam means together. So bound to, how are we all bound together, right? And so the image that is usually used to illustrate is a triangle. It's the sacred triangle of me, others, including like material nature and, all of the elements with which I interact, and God, Goddess. And so what is the relationship between those three? If there is confusion about what is me, what is material energy, and what is divine energy, everything is going to be mismatched, including my most intimate relationships, my marriage, my parenthood, my me being the daughter of someone, me showing up in the workplace and so on. It's all going to be disorganized because I haven't oriented myself to like my place in the cosmos. And if you don't have that, then everything is going to be off. Just like if you like chart a flight, I don't know, from, where I live, near Gainesville to like Hong Kong, and you're like off by like 2 degrees, you like end up in like Bali, Indonesia. It's like just 2 degrees, but you charted it incorrectly. So the whole trajectory is off. The whole
Mhm.
trajectory is off because it's a couple of degrees the whole time. So the same thing happens in relationships. So the reason why I bring in Sambandha is because there is a tendency, especially in our postmodern world, especially in cultures that emphasize consumerism and capitalism and, mutual exploitation and, all of these things,
Mhm.
is that I am the center.
Mhm.
And so long as I am the center, we don't have that sacred geometry. We don't have that sacred triangle of right understanding. What is my place in the universe? What is my relationship to nature? What is my relationship to God? I'm the center. But as long as I'm the center, none of reality is going to make sense because reality doesn't really follow that formula. Nothing in reality confirms that I'm the center. In fact, everything in reality seems to contradict that I'm the center. I struggle when I'm the center. I suffer when I'm the center. I make others suffer when I'm the center. And I lose connection with divinity. I lose connection with nature, right? Our current like climate crisis is the product of us thinking I'm the center and nature serves me rather than I'm in a symbiotic relationship with nature where I'm meant to serve and steward nature. And what's happening? Not only am I destroying nature, now nature's destroying me. We're destroying us. So it only causes suffering when that triangle is not positioned properly. So the work that I do in working with relationships and bringing in this bhakti framework is saying, actually, if you understand your position in the cosmos, it empowers you to work in harmony with the modes of nature, in harmony with your own spiritual nature, and in harmony with your kind of destiny, with the laws of karma and your journey in like reestablishing a loving connection with God. So, I've seen in practical ways, so many ways in which decentering yourself and centering divinity, centering service, centering compassion and the kind of loving qualities and characteristics of a bhakta transforms relationships for the better, right? Because now we are both working towards a common goal, which is reestablishing our sense of true identity and our loving relationship with each other and with God. So it's a common goal that transcends my ego and so on. And even basic things, like engaging in spiritual practices that feel fulfilling and nourishing with your partner. That can be so harmonic, that can be so beautiful, and it really fills that well of companionship, which is kind of like the foundational piece of couples work. Romance comes and goes, and commitment may take different shapes, but that companionship, that friendship, that camaraderie, really manifests in like, well, how do we do life together? So having a path like bhakti, which maps out, well, this is how I want to do life, then looking at your partner and saying, you know, like, do you want to do this together? You know, let me support you. Will you support me? You know, and then walking that path together, I think it can be really beautiful. So it's definitely still a work in progress because Bhakti has traditionally been more the realm and territory of like celibate monks and monastic life, and much of the literature that is out there seems to be getting at it from that angle. But when you see the basic literatures of the Bhakti tradition, like the Bhagavad Gita or like the Srimad Bhagavatam, the emphasis is very much on giving this knowledge to people who had families, right? It's like kings and householders and, you know, people who had relationships that they were in. They were not reclusive. You know, it's very, very unusual for the focus to be them, actually. So I think that it's very relevant in our age. You know, like you said, we're all in relationship, and there's this beautiful teacher that I also listen to. Her name is Carolyn Meese, and she says, you know, the bygone times are the times of the reclusive monastic teacher or student who's just kind of off in their cave in the Himalayas or off in some, you know, monastery in Europe, you know, just like solo studying. And nowadays, the yogi, the sage, it lives in the world, and their work is in the world, and their austerity is in the world, and their study is in relationship, and their work is in relationship. So that's the water that I'm swimming in. That's what I'm fascinated by, and that's what I love to learn alongside people. So I find that that's the work that we're doing, which is really I'm learning about it, and as I learn, I share, and as they share, they teach me, and so it becomes this kind of growing community of like, how do we do right relationship using bhakti as a framework?
Mm, I love it. Thank you so much for explaining that. It's so helpful to give that framework. Um, if I'm not careful, I'll hijack this whole call and just keep asking you questions. So I'm gonna pause. I
That's
want
okay
I
too.
want I want to turn it over because you got something great prepared. So please. So the yeah, this I'll just read again. The title that we have for our session today is The Opulence of the Feminine in Mature Spirituality. And I know when we share that with Hanna, she's like so intrigued. So please let us know more about this.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, you know, before we jump in, now that we've kind of moved through that, I just want to offer an invocation of gratitude to our teachers who have guided us on this path and who have empowered us to offer ourselves humbly to sharing wisdom, transmitting what we are learning as we are learning it, and sharing the beauty of this bhakti culture with the world. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. All right, so um, I think that when when I was approached by Jack to kind of think of a topic that I thought would be relevant, he shared a list of some of the speakers and what their topics were. And to be honest, I was blown away. I was like, there is nothing that I could add to this amazing list of topics. And I felt so excited for everything that everybody was going to share. But one thing that I have found is that in our spiritual communities, there still is this space that is necessary to cultivate, which is highlighting the beauty of feminine qualities and the feminine aspect of divinity, not limited to a female material form, transcending far beyond that and saying, what are these qualities that are considered to be feminine that contribute to mature spirituality? You know, in today's like globalized world, we have access to every form of like superficial spirituality, right? What they call like vanity karma, which is like all the things that you do that really just kind of point back at you. Um, and that end up being vanity, not in the self-centered way, vanity meaning they're done in vain. meaning we're not understanding the true essence of why we're doing them, and so they don't give a proper result. And I think that there's an authenticity aspect that is amplified by tuning into some of these feminine qualities. So when contemplating, okay, how do we share this? A verse came to mind from the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 10. So in chapter 10, it's called the opulence of the divine. And so it's Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita sharing with Arjuna a way of being able to reference God's nature and God's qualities in everyday life, basically. And he's even saying, like, of fish, I am the shark, and of purifiers, I am the wind. And so it's basically orienting to like everything that you see that is majestic, opulent, powerful, important, essential. That's me, that's my nature. And it's just a little spark of everything that I am. And so in that, interestingly, this is one verse and it's got like two very like powerful anchors here. This is just for whoever would like to reference it. It's chapter 10 and it's verse 34. And so Krishna says, I am all devouring death, and I am the generating principle of all that is yet to be. Among women, I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. So, I mean, I've heard this verse like hundreds of times, and every time I read it, it doesn't fail to kind of shock me. The first part of the verse is quite a strong statement, and in almost a completely different direction, the second part of the verse is also a very powerful statement. I am all devouring death, and I am the generating principle of all that is yet to be. There's a masculine edge to this of just like an all-consuming time machine, right? And even when Krishna shows Arjuna his universal form, it's like this gruesome, completely overwhelming cosmic vision of all of Krishna's energies moving and consuming and devouring, literally devouring all of creation, basically, through this like extremely gigantic, powerful, vision that he shares with Arjuna. And I'm the generating principle of all that is yet to be, right? So one of the definitions of Bhagavan, of Krishna, is sarva karana karanam. It means that everything that's caused by something else, that's caused by something else, that's caused by something else is ultimately, originally caused by Krishna. So everything that is finished by Krishna, and everything that is originated and is yet to be is also by Krishna's power. So there's that kind of masculine energy to it. But when I read this verse, and this is a personal interpretation, right? A personal interpretation, meaning this is a realization that I've had kind of based on where I'm at in understanding bhakti, is that there's also a very powerful feminine principle here. The feminine is also life giver, life carrier, right? And so it's interesting that then it transitions from that part of the verse into among women, I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. It's kind of like a reprieve, right? Like a landing space after that very big, powerful part of the verse. So then I started looking into kind of the different elements here that are being named by Krishna. And it's interesting that in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is giving some orientation as to like, what do these qualities mean in practical life, right? So he's saying the 7 opulences that are listed are considered feminine, right? That's what it says, among women I am. If a person possesses all of them or even some of them, he becomes glorious. She becomes glorious, right? If a person is righteous, if a person speaks nicely and so on. So I was thinking, okay, but glorious in what context? Glorious not just in the context of like, oh, in society, you're well known as a speaker. There's the kind of superficial or vanity aspect of these qualities. But I think that there is an important contribution that these qualities make to a mature spiritualist. Right. And so that's kind of what I wanted to dive into, because I find it fascinating and I also find it helpful. Right. So the indwelling spirit, right, the actual spiritual spirit is considered to be feminine by nature, in relationship to the polarity of masculine and feminine, where God, goddess, the original divinity is considered masculine. right? Our devotion is to be given to them, and then they are to reciprocate with us, shelter us, and hold that space. And whatever love we have is actually coming from them also. Um, in fact, the feminine counterpart of divinity, Radharani, Srimati Radharani, is considered Bhakti Devi, meaning that Bhakti, or the devotion itself, flows from her. And of its own sweet will, it kind of embodies us. All we are doing, it's not like we can generate devotion. It's that our essential nature is to serve. And when we prepare ourselves as vessels, that devotion pours into us and we're able to offer that back to divinity. So it's this beautiful relationship that we're in to begin with. And all we're doing is kind of awakening. It's like a remembrance. So, kind of in practical terms, so how do these specific qualities that are naturally feminine, meaning feminine by nature, how do they manifest in the mature spiritualist, right? So we could start with the first one. The first one, which I think is beautiful, is kirti. And that's such an important, it's such an important quality, specifically in this age, right? We're in the age of quarrel, disagreement, contention, right? I don't have to tell you that, you know that. Just like one spin on Facebook or on Instagram, and you're like, oh yeah, I know exactly what age we're in. So, it's considered that, there's all these kinds of elaborate spiritual practices that are named in the Vedas, and all these like very specific rituals and mantras to be chanted, and yagyas, or austerities, sacrifices, rituals to be performed. And those are considered basically of a bygone era, because the human being as we exist now in our current age is not capable or qualified to do all of these elaborate rituals, right? And so basically, the grace, right? Grace in the age of distraction, the grace of this age is that spiritual practice is condensed and simplified, becomes concentrated and distilled into the practice of kirtan, right? Kirti means to glorify, and kirtan is the act of glorifying. So this could be glorifying divinity via speech, like we're speaking the glories of God. And more specifically, it's considered to be sankirtan, which means along with others, like we're here together in a group, right? Virtually in a sangha, sankirtan, together, we are glorifying divinity. We are coming together to glorify divinity. And this very much includes Harinam Sankirtan, which is chanting divine names, the names of Krishna, together in unison as a congregation, in a congregational way. And so it's interesting that kirti, which is considered to be fame, right? It's translated in the verse as fame, but it's also considered to be glory or reputation, right? It's basically a way of connecting to this principle of kirtan, right? To be able to glorify another, to be able to tap into the tendency to call out, to sing out in praise, right? And that being the prime spiritual practice for our age. So, not just in terms of the bhakti spiritual practice of doing kirtan, is this an obvious representation of how to connect to grace in an age of distraction, but then how does it relate to the personal? The personal means kirti. What is my glory? Not glory in the vain sense or in a self-centered way, but how would I consider my behavior, my presence in the world, how I show up to be glorious? And this is a really nice question to ask ourselves. If in a non-superficial, non-vain way, I look back on myself and how I showed up in relationships, how I showed up in the world, and I could say to myself, wow, that was really glorious. What would have been required of me? How would I have needed to show up, right? So this is the angle at which I think it would be interesting to take a look at some of the elements of this verse. Kirti, right? How do my reputation, again, not in society how people speak of me, but what I'm known for. What am I known for? What is my signature energy? How do I show up in the world? What are my glories in the sense of the qualities that I decided to refine as an offering to my relationships? So that I think that that's a very beautiful feminine quality to be focusing on. And we'll kind of just bookmark that as a reflection. How do I show up in full glory, full spiritual glory in my relationships, right? It gives us a sense of organizing our values. Well, I won't know if I'm in integrity and showing up properly in a way that makes me feel like I showed up gloriously in that relationship if I don't know what my values are. So it's actually asking us to go quite deep and organize ourselves and say, what matters to me? And how do I know what matters to me? And then it comes back again to the practice of bhakti. Because bhakti means I understand myself in relationship to divinity and in relationship to others. And based on that, that's going to generate a series of values. Well, I value compassion. I value kindness. I value truth. I value studying. I value kirtan. I value relationships. I value service. I value cleanliness. I value waking up early. I value protecting women and children. I value a society of people who know how to communicate properly. Well, now all of a sudden, I have tools to orient me to how I show up in the world. And acting on that, acting congruently with my values, is going to generate my reputation. That's going to generate my glory, right? So I wanted to make that connection between kirti as kirtan, which is like the prime practice of our bhakti tradition, and then bridging that into also, we shouldn't seek to glorify ourselves, but we should seek to be glorious by our behavior and by our character. And in order to be glorious in character, we need to have an organizing value system that orients us to, are we doing what we intend to do or not? And bhakti can inform that value system. So I hope that that's clear. I'll move on because I just want to be mindful of time also. Um, so the next quality is Shri, which is so interesting because Shri is considered to be, first of all, one of the indicators of the feminine counterpart of divinity. So the goddess of fortune is very prominently known in the Vedic language as uh, the goddess of fortune, as Lakshmi. So she's the counterpart to Narayan, the counterpart to Vishnu, the counterpart to Krishna. So Shri, because she's the origin and the source of all beauty. And her beauty itself, she's the embodiment of beauty, and that itself is an offering to divine, to Krishna. And so Shri, or our own beauty, is best served by using it in service. Our material form is like constantly aging, deteriorating, falling apart, needing maintenance, right? And so there's a way in which if we try and center ourselves in that Shri, it becomes very dangerous. It's kind of the same thing of what we were talking about at the beginning because it's unsatisfying. It's unsatisfying because it's not permanent, it's temporary, it's in a state of constant deterioration. And as we find in relationships, doing something for myself is never as satisfying as doing something for somebody else or doing something for the relationship. So how do we translate this into spiritual life? In fact, in many places in the Vedas, it is we are reminded that beauty can be an impediment to spiritual life, right? They're considered to be like some hallmark impediments to spiritual life. Beauty, high birth, wealth, and knowledge, which is fascinating because these are essentially the things that everybody's chasing. I would like some money. I would like to look good. It'd be cool if my family was doing pretty well, and I'd like to feel like pretty knowledgeable and in the know of the things that there are to know. So what's interesting is that any of these qualities could be transformed through the lens of bhakti as a beautiful offering in our relationship with divinity, or it can be considered an impediment, right? Knowledge, for example, like you can know so much stuff and you can read so much, even Vedic things, even Shastric things, and it starts to build up a library of things that you can quote and of things that you can share and of things that you can feel very proud of, and it's walling you off to the realization of those truths. Because what we've done is amassed it in service of our ego rather than used it as a template to deepen our devotion. Right? The knowledge is considered knowledge, but it's not considered metabolized into wisdom. Right? Vigyan means realized knowledge. Right? But that's not what they're talking about when they're talking about an impediment. When they're talking about an impediment, they usually use the word smriti, which is your capacity to like memorize stuff. It's scholasticism or the ability to learn without necessarily feeling that integrated or embodied element to be the reality, the realization of that knowledge. So it's knowledge transformed as wisdom is then considered conducive for bhakti, but knowledge just kind of amassed for its own sake, it starts to actually kind of like fester, and it starts to become an impediment, because what it is being used in the service of ego. So in this sense, Shri could actually have that same effect, which is wealth, opulence, beauty kind of amassed in the service of my ego is totally toxic and poisonous and completely unsustainable, which becomes increasingly frustrating over time. But if it's used as an expression, as an offering back to divinity, right? Whatever wealth we have, whatever opportunity we have, whatever beauty we have or can create, right? For those of us that are creatives, that are artists, that are visionaries, then all of that beauty can be used in service of divinity, right? And then there's that, again, that feminine element that enters our spiritual life. How do I beautify this for God, right? And the ultimate ornament, actually, is devotion. The ultimate ornament, the actual thing that makes something beautiful, is devotion. Right? That's the ultimate ornament. One of Krishna's names is Bhavagrahi Janardana. It means that what he eats, grahi means like to grab, but it also means to kind of like consume, is bhava. Bhava means like your feeling, right? The heart that you put into it. That's what he's actually consuming. In relationship, what he's actually extracting, what she's actually extracting, what they're actually extracting from an offering is the feeling of it. It's not the matter of it, right? My daughter's 5th birthday was just a few days ago, and they gave her all these, little art supplies and stuff, and she made a drawing, a self-portrait. And so what she drew as her self-portrait, I wish I had it with me, I have it in the other room, but what she drew as her self-portrait was a heart with 2 eyes, a nose, and a little line for a smiley face, and a little string coming out of the bottom. She calls it a heart balloon. This is like her favorite thing to draw, is a heart balloon. So it's like this big smiling heart face with a little balloon. And then a big heart crystal sticker bindi, like right in the middle of her forehead. And that was like her self. She's like, this is me. And the thing is, if you look at it, you're like, okay, this is a simple drawing. The sticker is like pretty symmetrically placed. It was a little impressive to me. But what I feel when I see it and what she felt when she was making it was her bhav. When you see that photo, I showed it to my husband, I showed it to my mom, and I said, check out Nama's self-portrait. And they both said the same thing, which was my feeling when I saw it, which is, that is Nama. Nama's my daughter. That is Nama. Like, that's the essence of her. Does the drawing hold any likeness? Not at all, obviously. But her essence is all over it. You just see it and you go, oh my God, that's Nama. So if that can be an analogy, right, analogous to what we're talking about here, we're saying that your bhav, who you are, the devotion, what you poured into it, your essence coming through something, is the ornament, right? Is what actually infuses the offering. That's what makes it tasty or attractive, or in this case, using the word in the verse we're using, Shri, it's what makes it beautiful. It's what makes it beautiful. It makes us beautiful, right? So now the next one is interesting. I really liked being able to kind of meditate on this and say, okay, all right, Kirti, I can understand. Shri, okay. Vak meaning fine speech. And I was like, man, fine speech, how does this translate to like practical spirituality, right? Because there is some sense that, especially in bhakti, which is a tradition of devotion, a tradition of spontaneous feeling, a tradition of the heart, there is a felt sense that words are extremely limited, that actually words don't do an experience justice, right? And that the essence of what happens in your heart when you feel that deep devotion, when you feel that connection, is actually ineffable. Ineffable meaning like there is no access to being able to describe a certain reality, right? The personality of Ananta Shesh, he has so many millions of mouths and he's constantly glorifying God. And even then it's like not enough. and he's an expansion of God himself. And so there's a felt sense of like, fine speech, what does this mean? So I was thinking about in relationship, um, what does this really translate to? If I were to ground this like in my work with people or even in my personal experience, how does it translate? How does fine speech reflect in a mature spiritualist? And two things came to mind. One is to understand that language and reality are in constant relationship. Language is not just a reflection of what's happening. Language actually helps create what's happening, right? There have been studies done on this about how the language that you use actually start to color the way in which you see the world. And you can see this very clearly. I'm raising small kids. I have a 2.5-year-old and I have a 5-year-old. How I say things matters practically as much or more as what I say. Because how the words that I'm using and the tone that I'm using is coloring their reality. It's giving them more information than just the text of what I'm saying. More than the transcript of what I'm saying, it's transmitting to them a sense of reality. And this happens in relationships at every age and in every stage. Right? And so it's realizing that fine speech is not just the sophistication of my language, it's actually the intention and presence with which I communicate. And this is a feminine gift. Feminine gift because either by biology or social conditioning or perhaps a marriage of both, women are the keepers of relationship. Women are the stewards of relationship. Women are tuned into relationship. Not women, just people embodied in a female form, but anyone who's really tuned in to feminine nature and feminine qualities has the capacity to understand the value of relationship and the value of language in the relationship. So one aspect is, what are you saying and how are you saying it? And realizing that as a yogi, this is actually an austerity, right? The austerity of speech and the austerity of silence. Those are very important austerities in today's day and age, especially when everybody has a platform and everybody's you know, people have followers. Isn't that wild when we go on Instagram or on wherever? I guess now everywhere has followers, Twitter and Facebook and stuff. It's mind-boggling. This is like the number one thing that yogis are like passionately trying to avoid at all costs in all scriptures. It's like, I don't want wealth, I don't want adoration, I don't want followers. And now in the modern world, like, the more followers the better. Follow me, like and follow, click to subscribe, like and share with your friends. The more followers the better. It's like it's completely wild. So in this sense, the way in which we show up with our language is going to dictate the quality of our reality and therefore the quality of our relationships. So that was one aspect that I was thinking of. And the other one is being congruent. Congruent meaning what you say and how you live are in alignment. So fine speech meaning there's a specificity to what you share, and then you are able to embody that. Because nowadays it's so easy to talk. The same platform, thing that I'm sharing of having followers and being able to kind of curate your image and create content and use special hashtags or trending words and so on. There's a way in which speech actually becomes calculated, and because it's calculated, it's inauthentic. And as much as we may enjoy consuming the content because of the dopamine rush that we get, there's a felt sense of it's totally vacuous and empty. It's not really hitting where it's supposed to hit. It's not landing all layers deep. And it's because that authenticity and embodiment piece is what we're looking for, and we're not able to find it. So in relationships, as a mature spiritualist, it means that we're very selective with what we say and how we say it. We're tuned into that nuance, which is a highly feminine skill. And the counterpart to that grounds it in reality and gives like an effective experience in relationship is to be congruent, is to really mean what you say through your actions and through the way that you show up in relationships. So that was sort of a meditation on that. Kind of following suit very closely on that is the next characteristic, right? Which is smriti. Smriti is considered memory. And so I was thinking, is it the same sprinty of like memorizing things and just being able to, kind of retain knowledge? Is it like retaining literary information? And then when I looked into other times in which the word smriti is used specifically in Bhakti texts, there's a huge emphasis on smriti actually being finding your proper duty. That's actually one of the quotes that I found, to find one's proper duty. It's also defined as self-realization. So it's not the remembering of like facts and quotes and thank God, because this happens to be like a great Achilles heel of mine. Especially because I'm still like in the breastfeeding years where it's just like memory is just like some far gone faculty that I think I had once. I don't know if it'll return. So I'm hoping that my bhakti is like not at all banking on my capacity to like retain information. But luckily, what I found is that it's actually way more focused on self-realization. So smriti is defined as that self-realization that is a remembrance, not memorization. It's remembering. It is a return. And everywhere in the bhakti literature, it's described that to live the path of bhakti is not to kind of like onboard all these foreign practices as a way of sort of like forcing your nature into this artificial kind of performative thing that eventually you reach. It's actually the opposite. Bhakti is the peeling back of layers and layers and layers of conditioning and like calcified patterns and misunderstandings and the layers of ego and ahankar, centering myself and misunderstanding my position in right relationship until I arrive at my essential self. So it's a return to that essential self. It's a remembering. So when you hear this word smriti in this context, it is the feminine quality of remembrance, which is a soft, tender, very vulnerable, actually, quality. It's a very vulnerable quality to say, if I forgot, right? If I allowed all of my calcified patterns and conditioning to become loosened from my memory, if I loosen the grip of like, this is who I am and this is what I do and this is my, all of me, the I, me minds, if I loosen the grip on that and I allowed myself to forget it, even for a moment, right? Even while I'm chanting, even for one mantra, if I allowed myself to forget that, what would I remember? What would I remember if I forgot all the ego stuff? What's that deepest memory? And I think for all of us that have in some way been moved or touched by the practices of bhakti, there's been that feeling, right? And that feeling sometimes comes as like a vague, again, very hard to capture in language, but there's a feeling of like, oh yeah, oh yeah. And maybe that comes when we see the form of the Lord and a deity, or maybe that happens when we grab our malas and we're chanting in private meditation, or when we're singing out, calling out in congregational chanting, or when we hear the voice of our teacher, or where we bow down in a holy place, or any of these kind of like mystical portals of connection, where suddenly we just like, it hits us and we're like, oh yeah, oh yeah. So that remembrance, that's the smriti that we're talking about here. And it's a necessary component in mature spirituality because it's realizing that all we're doing is returning to who we are and not imposing. That's why it's considered a descending faith, not an ascending faith. It's not an achievement thing where I'm climbing this ladder and I ring the bell at the top. It's like ding, 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 self-realization. It's like, no, not at all. This knowledge, this wisdom, this grace, this mercy comes raining down and it helps me shed all these layers of the unnecessary and the unreal and the temporary. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, that remembrance. So this next one is so beautiful because it's specifically even the actual um, definition, right? The word is medha, and it's defined as intelligence. And I once heard this incredible teacher, Vishaka Devidasi. She's a very senior teacher in our Bhakti tradition. She was speaking about how often women are characterized or categorized especially in the patriarchal interpretations of any faith, really, but of this faith specifically, as like less intelligent, less than, unfortunate, a lower birth, and so on. And without getting into the very deep conversation about that, um, she shares that in many places in scripture, feminine intelligence is considered medha. And medha is not just intelligence in an academic sense or in a scholastic sense. It goes well beyond that, and it specifically pertains to intelligence as experienced in relationship, as experienced in context. So it's knowledge that is applied accurately according to this time, this place, and this circumstance. It's a very nuanced but very important form of intelligence, which is the way in which I show up with what I know, given this specific circumstance and the needs that are present at this time. And I think that Srila Prabhupada was such an expert at this specific kind of intelligence. It shows all of his beautiful feminine qualities coming to the forefront, that he was able to display these qualities so openly and so generously with his students and with the whole world, ultimately through his writings and through his recordings and everything that he shared. And perhaps one of his most important skills was this, Meda. He was able to show up in a context that was totally unstable, right? Which is the like hippie, post-hippie revolution of thought and consciousness that's happening in the West. He's never been here. He shows up in the Lower East Side of New York, which is, definitely at that time in the lower modes of nature. And he's able to say, I have this transcendental wisdom. And rather than just plugging and playing and imposing in an authoritarian way this information and kind of, shame bombing all of these kids into understanding their true essential nature, he basically wove his way into their hearts first and foremost and shared because he cared about these people. He had no other mission than to love. And so the love was the driving force behind the intelligence. Intelligence used in the service of love. Intelligence used in the service of relationship. So it's basically, how do I use everything that I know? How do I use everything that I have? Because out of compassion and true transcendent love, I care for these people. So that's what this medha is. Medha is understanding how to apply what you know in the service of love and in the service of relationship. And I know we only have a couple more minutes, but this last quality, which is shama, patience, this one has got to be like the alpha and the omega of qualities required in this age for the mature spiritualist. Because there's a certain sense of, I'll combine this in the last one, which is driti. Driti is your ability to be steadfast. It's your ability to stay steady. It's your ability to maintain. But this is like so difficult for us. I encounter it every day in my work. I encounter it every day in my life, which is, how do you stay steady when everything in the world is constantly this like moving carnival cruise ship of like unsteadiness? Nature is unsteady. Politics are unsteady. Economics are unsteady. My nature is unsteady. My relationships are unsteady. Everything is unsteady. And it's like, yeah, it's not steadiness determined by external things. It's steadiness determined by something internal, right? It's a determination. So determination doesn't necessarily mean things are always happening in this mechanical way and you're able to check all the boxes every day. It means that there's an unwavering faith within, that even if I fall, even if I stray, even if I miss, even if I'm off, I'm willing from a place of love, not from a place of like achievement or performance, from a place of love, because this is what I care to do, because this is what I understand is my true nature, is to recalibrate and center again. That determination. I will not be deterred from my mission. My mission is to love God, to love others, and to love myself. I will not be deterred. And then if something goes, a few degrees that way, then I recenter and I recenter. That's the determination that we're talking about. And this ties into this last quality, which is shama, which is patience. You have to be patient in order to maintain that determination, because it can be very frustrating. It can be extremely frustrating in relationship, especially, right? It's extremely difficult to keep these practices up while having a foot in like the material world and having to do all the things that we need to do just even to maintain body and soul together. You know, that in itself is its own struggle. And that's for those of us that live in a privileged first world experience, what to speak of people who are in a greatly disadvantaged position compared to us. So that should not only generate compassion, but that compassion should also further generate patience, patience with ourselves, patience with others, understanding that, you know, Prabhupada in the purport, he says that when one is fully qualified yet is humble and gentle, and when one is able to keep his balance both in sorrow and in the ecstasy of joy, he has the opulence called patience. So this is the marriage of seemingly contradictory situations or contradictory experiences. You can be fully qualified, but humble and gentle. So these are things that are perhaps paradoxical, but not necessarily mutually exclusive. When one is able to keep his balance, right, in sorrow, which is a necessary experience in this material world, it softens our hearts sufficiently to be able to touch base with true connection with others. That's one of the functions of sorrow. One of the functions of suffering is not just to reform us and awaken us like, oh my God, the material world is not my true home. That's an obvious function. But the other obvious function is I'm suffering, she's suffering, he's suffering, they're suffering. Oh my God, we're all suffering. Oh my God, here, let's sit together. Hang on a second. Let's be with each other. Right? That's one of the functions of sorrow. One of the functions of sorrow is to understand our intimate connection with all other living beings, human, animal, natural. And in the ecstasy of joy, right? So bhakti is also not a proponent of lose yourself in this ecstatic trance, disconnect from the world and disregard all other living beings. It's just you and divinity now. That's it's also not the escapist path of, you know, ecstatic trance that disconnects you from the lived experience of others. You know, just like Srila Prabhupada was called into the depths of the Bowery at the time of the, you know, hippie revolution. We are all being called in to some Bowery somewhere to share what we know, to share what we're learning, not even what we know, to share what we're learning, right? To be student teachers, meaning I know, and I'm just going to try and put this into practice. And putting this into practice is maybe going to help me move a few feet further, and maybe it'll help you move a few feet further in. But we're walking this together. We're walking this together. We're accompanying each other. There's a sense of camaraderie. There's a sense of companionship, walking each other towards that love of divine masculine, divine feminine, of Radha and Krishna, the divine couple, because that's who I actually am. That's who we actually are. We're just remembering together. And it does take quite a lot of patience. Part of the patience is also discovering and rediscovering spiritual technologies and understanding how to implement them in the real world in real time. Part of the patience is knowing that the wisdom is there and not like fully understanding how to bring it to life, how to manifest it. How does this make sense in my practical life? So to kind of conclude, I think that's what we're doing here. When we come together in a forum around grace in the age of distraction, what we're doing is expressing both driti, which is determination. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to stick to this. I want to do this. I want to live this path. This is for me. This is for us. This is for the good of the world. This is going to uplift the entire vibration of the cosmos. But I don't yet know how. And that's the shama piece. That's the patient piece. We got to figure this out, and we got to figure this out together. Everybody pull in your voice. What do? You sing, you speak, you have a sustainable eco village, you work with relationships, you're a mother, you're a teacher, you know yoga, you work with farm animals, you know, just bring in your voice. Let's figure this out together. So in that, I humbly ask for us all to anchor into all of these qualities that are naturally feminine, that reside within all of us in potential, and that we can really bring forth now as a gift to the world. Our feminine characteristics, our feminine nature is such an important contribution. It's such a wealth in this world. And that's why Krishna calls them opulences. They're opulences. They beautify us because they amplify our devotion, which is the ultimate ornament. and they also beautify the world because it uplifts the vibration. And so I ask us to find ways to cultivate these qualities, to encourage the cultivation of these qualities in others, in our communities. And I so much feel grateful to Jack and to all of you for being present today. And I do want to leave a few minutes for questions. I'm so sorry I went over time. It tends to happen, but I really wanted to give kind of the stuff that I had been reading on, and yeah, I'm happy to hear any questions or any comments or feedback. I see a lot of movement and head nodding. Okay, great, hearts.
Oh my goodness, Danya, that was so good. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, your wisdom with us. Yeah, you're right. Like we ideally would have stopped 17 minutes ago for Q&A, but we couldn't interrupt. Like that was
I'm so
just
sorry.
such no, it was so good. I mean, truthfully, it brought me to tears at moments, because you were speaking truth. You were just it just clicks inside, and my heart is just saying like, yes, this is why we're on this path. So thank you. Friends, now you can understand why twice a month I'm on a Zoom call with Dunya. She's getting me back on track. um, I don't think she has much availability, but I'm telling you, if you are looking for a therapist, try and get in touch with her, see if she has some space. And I mean, we've even attracted beautiful souls. Rukmini Walker has been here, acknowledging, complimenting your work. She's another one of the speakers that we had feedback that really brought up emotions, and we feel that with you, just like such deep devotion. We are over time. If there is a question, raise your hand. We might be able to sneak in a quick one. Okay, we got one. So beautiful. Let's get Sarah and George, Team UK. Come on
I
down.
think we both got one.
Okay, all right. Oh,
You do yours
thank you,
first.
Deanna. I was just thinking, in the beginning you were mentioning, most of the texts, you think you should basically sort of live like a monk, have no desires, don't make any money, um, and so on. How what as a therapist, what would you say were the top things that married couples or families, householders struggle with trying to integrate the Bhakti faith in their life, or misinterpret? So sort of struggle and misinterpret how they should live their life.
Maybe one rather than three, as we're
Yeah. So
over
I was just
time.
thinking, what were the top things you would say that where they've read the purport and so on, and they're now misinterpreting. They think it's quite severe as to what they should do in their life because they've misunderstood how it applies to householders and married couples.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that this is it's a phenomenon that's quite common, and I don't necessarily know that it's specifically a phenomenon that happens in householder life. I think that across all ashrams, there seems to be a desire because of our fear of what a great leap it is to leave our understanding of material life. It's such a great leap to be countercultural in that way, that we would like to land in a formula. We'd like to leave this formula of like, you go to school, you get a degree, you make some money, you buy the house, you and your partner, you have a family or choose not to, amass a certain amount of money, and retire in peace. That's a formula. That's a formula, right? So we'd like to hop out of that and go, okay, not that, because I see it's not sustainable, it's not fulfilling, it's quite exploitive. Um, so is there like another formula that I can like hop into? Oh, is it just, okay, so I renounce and then I have like no money and then you become the submissive wife and then I'm your guru husband and then we have like 12 children and they're
We live
our
in the forest.
disciples. And then when we turn 50, then
Hmm.
you go to the forest, I go to the forest, we retire and then we transcend. Haribol. So we would love a formula. We would love a formula, but that's totally not how it works. And if you look at the Bhagavatam specifically, the Bhagavatam may be the best example of a series of story after story after story after story about how the formula totally doesn't work and it gets flipped on its head.
Right.
So children become the teachers of their parents. People that are born of like a demoniac lineage end up being saints. People who are born of a saintly lineage end up being demoniac. People who are considered lowly in the caste system become liberated. People who are considered very high in the caste system are exploitive and totally lose their center and then kind of dwindle. People who are yogis, who are very proud of their accomplishments, fall and fail. People who are very like humble and meek actually rise up and get direct, vision and contact with divinity. And that even divinity himself and herself break all kinds of rules in the service of love. So if our desire is to, there's a term, there's actually Buddhist literature where they coin it as spiritual materialism, which is like, now I get to use my spiritual life in service of my ego, or in service of my conditioning, or in service of, XYZ. There's a lot of like prosperity gospel energy out there also about how like Krishna just wants you to make so much money and you just have to join my little pyramid scheme family and I'll help you make it happen. So all of this to say that there's so many ways in which we can miss the mark hoping to plug into a formula. But really, there's no substitute for the real thing. And the real thing is, what is in your heart? Are you developing true love and devotion for a specific expression of divinity? And in doing that, is that the organizing principle for your life and for your relationships? So what I find in couples is that they work from the outside in rather than from the inside out. That's actually the most difficult part. They try and plug in cultural things. They try and plug in like gender roles or cultural norms and stuff, rather than working from the inside out, which is, let me focus on me getting rid of my ego layers, softening my heart, and offering my devotion, not just to divinity, but to those people that divinity has placed in my life for me to care for. And that will include my spouse, my children, my parents, my siblings, and so on. The caliber of our relationships is often a nice barometer for, what's going on in my inner work. So, it's a simplified answer because it's a broad question, but I appreciate it. I definitely think that, the Grihastha ashram, the family ashram, is an excellent arena for all kinds of understandings to come to fruition, but also for all kinds of misunderstandings to play out as well.
Yeah, no, that sounds great, because a lot of what you read pings a lot of our radars because it's very sexist and very old-fashioned, and I guess ultimately loving who you're with and serving from where you are, I think, is a good way of doing it. So that feels right.
Yeah, and also you'll see, one of the beautiful things of our Bhakti lineage is the emphasis that it places on the guru-disciple relationship, and how all the wisdom came from your teacher and that teacher got it from their teacher, and it's constantly passing that glory and passing that gratitude and that indebtedness up. But it's also studying the lives of these people and realizing that every single person in our lineage, let's say specifically the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, which is the branch of Vaishnavism and of Bhakti that I personally am familiar with and aligned with, and many of us in this forum are as well. When you study the lives of these acharyas, of these teachers, and you study their historical context and their social context, each and every one of them was revolutionary in some way. So it would be absurd, I think, to think that the revolutionariness stopped at Prabhupada and that there's no further revolutions to be had. There's no further social or, societal, historical change to be made. Now it's just a plug and play. Again, the seeking of the formula. We just do it how they did it, and then that's it. But none of them did it that way. Each of them further pushed forth a revolution, more access to this wisdom, more availability of the practices, more permission, right? And more authenticity. So it's not that it got watered down or diluted as a companion element to this access. It means greater access, but then greater authenticity. And so I think that we have to embody that as well. It's a signature energy of our parampara to say whatever is holding us back from sharing and practicing bhakti is a problem. And so the further into Kali Yuga we go, it'd be crazy to think that the problems are less, that the impediments are less. No, likely the impediments are going to be more. So that it comes back to the same driti and shama, to stay determined and say, you know what? There is patriarchy, there is sexism, there is misogyny, there is neglect of children, neglect of the elderly, Okay, so then does the revolution stop with Prabhupada, or does the revolution continue with me? And the revolution actually starts in the family, right? They say like charity begins at home. So to be charitable in that sense, to be spiritually charitable, to be very generous, and to break with those limitations, societal, historical, cultural, whatever, starts at home. So it starts with how you treat your spouse, how you treat your kids, how you educate the people in your immediate circle, and how that ripples out and ripples out. To think that it's going to come from the top, that it's going to come from leadership, that it's going to come from the institution. First of all, it's not. And second of all, none of our acharyas have done it that way. None of our teachers have done it that way. We don't have a single example of someone who just kind of like followed the. So it's basically saying, yeah, take on that nature, take on the spirit humbly, humbly, take on the spirit of our teachers and say, oh, the revolution continues, and it continues with me, and it starts in my home.
Oh my goodness, so good. I love it. Let's send some love, high vibes to Sarah and George over in Kent, UK. Wonderful, beautiful question. Dhanya, thank you so much for your time. I mean, I've got so many more questions, and I'm sure others do. But we've gone over. I want to respect your time and everyone's time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been such a joy to be with you, and I'm wishing you such success and all of the best in this beautiful, beautiful conference. I believe so much in it, and I think it's such an expression of your hard work and your dedication and your ability to really bring people together to share this truth with the world. And I know that it's just, a small seed that's being planted that's going to grow into this big, beautiful blossoming experience.
Well, thank you for the inspiration and the guidance. We wouldn't be here without teachers like you. So my friends, can we send so much love and high vibes to Dhanya and make it an amazing rest of the day? We'll see you soon. Hare Krishna.
Thank you
Hare
so
Krishna.
much.
Take care.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare
Thank you
Krishna.
so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.